Hello, my sober lovelies. Before we dive in, I'm really excited to announce my group coaching program for women is live, and you can join now. So excited for this because let's be real here. Quitting drinking isn't just about saying no to the glass of wine or booze. It's about what comes after. All the fear, the boredom, the late night anxiety, and the stories you've been telling yourself for years. And that's where my Rewired Sober group coaching program for women comes in. It's only $247. I'm being totally transparent on the price. It's for 3 months, and you'll learn how to shift your mindset, build habits that actually stick, and question the core beliefs that have been keeping you stuck, and find healthier ways to deal with that loneliness and that now what feeling. The best part is you don't have to do it alone. We'll have live group coaching sessions weekly, and there'll be a bunch of women walking through it with you. It's not another cookie cutter sobriety program for mommy vloggers. It's neuroscience meets real life, and it's designed for women to help you not just stay sober, but actually feel good living sober. You can join anytime, and I'd love to see you on the inside. So start today, get instant access. The link's in the show notes. Welcome to Rewired Sober, the podcast where we unpack what it really takes to rewire your brain after alcohol. Hi, I'm your host, Kate Vitella, a registered nurse, board certified in mental health and addiction, sober since 2018, and a coach who blends neuroscience, lived experience, and real talk to help women break the shame spiral and rebuild their thinking with tools like journaling, humor, and honest conversation. This isn't surface level sobriety. This is where the healing gets deep, grounded, and unapologetically honest. So let's get into it. Welcome back to another episode. Today's guest I'm excited to bring on, and it's the first time I'm doing this. This is a previous coaching client who I really felt like had some good insights to share about her journey. And I'm going to have her briefly introduce herself. Her name is Tammy Pozerycki. I'm very fond of her. She's done such an amazing job on her sober journey, and not just because she's stacking up the days. There really is an element of insight and vulnerability, and we've shared quite a bit of humor, and I just think she has so much awesome stuff to share. So welcome to the pod, Tammy.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here, and honored as well. I thought I'd just introduce myself. I'm 55 years old. I have been in the field of healthcare for about 3 decades, working with people with dementia. So, as a dementia specialist, I work with people with dementia, families, healthcare professionals, and I do a lot of speaking engagements and coaching and consulting and also education programs. So I live central Massachusetts and I have a husband, 3 adult children who are all out of the home. Um, and yeah, that's just a little bio of me.
Yeah, I love that. What first struck me when you started talking about your bio is how you're essentially in healthcare and in healthcare education, and I was a nurse getting sober, and yet neither one of us knew hardly anything about sobriety coming into this journey. And I think that's a misnomer. People think, oh, they work in healthcare, they must know about addiction and sobriety and recovery. And it was, for both of us, there was a lot of learning in the beginning.
I used to, well, as many people probably did, smoke. And, after I stopped smoking, I would say to myself, how can nurses and doctors
Yeah.
and people who are educated have a smoking addiction? And guess what? It's doesn't matter the substance. Addiction is addiction. And I myself found that I had a problem with drinking alcohol. So as a young person, I went through a lot of criticism for my weight, my body image. I had my grandmother criticize me, and I'd always get that little, but you have such a beautiful face.
Yeah.
And we all know what that means. And a dance teacher that was cruel. And so I developed disordered eating, and I um, had an addiction of food. And I ended up having a gastric bypass and losing a lot of weight. And unfortunately, addiction was still there. And food addiction, because I couldn't overfeed myself, I could smoke. And smoking became the addiction. And after bouts of pneumonia and bronchitis and the recurrence of that, I ended up choosing alcohol and food, and more alcohol than food because I didn't want to gain weight back. And I thought, if I just drink, that's all the calories I need. And so I just had this ingrained behavioral response to emotion to just drink and numb.
Absolutely. Yeah, so identifiable. I remember you telling me that story when we first started working together, and I'll get into that a little bit later about the weight and the eating and the correlation, because I too struggled, in a different way with my body image and eating disorders, and essentially, I learned that came first long before the alcohol. It was very odd when I finally realized that, but, um, so you've been sober now about a year and a half?
Yeah, it's 551 days.
551 days. I love the day count. I love that. So, take me back to where you were, when you decided to reach out to me. What was going through your mind? Where was your head? What was going on in your life?
So I think part of my issue was that I I just kept relapsing. I was actually, sober, uh crying out loud. It was probably almost a year, and then gave in and drank again, and that was just kind of a repetitive, exhausting
Yes.
effort. And I did, all the things I thought I was supposed to do, the journaling and the therapy and, coping mechanisms, making all these coping mechanisms instituted in my life so that I don't turn to alcohol. And I really thought I had control over it, and I got very comfortable, and I got overconfident. And then I would have one moment of despair because life got lifey, and I was on a mode of just feeling so out of control and wanting to gain the control that I thought maybe that's what I did control was, well, I'm gonna drink. And I had a lot of cases of the fuckets. Like that was one of the things that would always catch me, and my brain was hijacked to think that, it was like the devil and the angel on my shoulders, and I turned into this person that I didn't like. I was lying, I was sneaking, I was doing all the things that someone who suffers from addiction goes through. Um, and I've joined the communities. I've been able to sort of find my space in the community world of support. I was never a person who wanted to go the AA route, although I know so many people who have benefited from that.
Yeah.
And I joined a group that online that was co-ed, and I didn't really like that, and it was very big. And then I found another all women group, all moms, and I think that piece of it was really the turning point for me when I had to be accountable to my supports. Um, because without accountability, who's going to know? Who's going to know? I'm going to know, and it's going to suck. But because I don't want to have other people disappointed in me, then I'm just going to say I didn't drink. And I think at the point where I reached out to you was I had had some time under my belt and I had had enough relapses. And I'm like, I can't keep doing this. I have to stay sober. And now, and when I think we worked, Kate, together like it was like 1 3-month chunk and then another 3-month chunk, I think. I think it was like almost a 6-month thing, and you really did help. I mean, yes, I have a therapist, but it's not the same as having someone who has gone through the journey and can share their own experience and then tell you the things that, number 1, I have to look deeper into and to ask myself to get real with myself. And I will never forget, sometimes you just have to sit in your shitty diaper.
Oh, of all the wisdom, of all
I
the
know.
wisdom.
I know. I know. I just thought that was great. And beyond that, just trying to get true to myself and become my authentic self. My problem, Kate, was that I didn't know who that person was. I didn't know who I was. I still am trying to figure that out at freaking 55 years old. I'm still trying to break generational trauma. I would say that there's struggles. There's more, I handle things a lot differently than I used to. Um, because the problem is that, well, a couple of things that I've figured out. One is that it takes so much work to get sober than it takes to stay sober. And I never want to return to day one. I don't. So I have told myself that that is my number one job. My number one job today and every single day I wake up is to go to bed without a drink. Um, and then the other thing is I've learned a lot of coping mechanisms like, just the pause, where I can, if I'm getting anxious, because I also have depression and anxiety that I've dealt with all my life. And sometimes my anxiety gets the best of me. Um, but I'm trying to re nurture myself. Like I felt like a baby again in some ways, like trying to find out how do I figure out these emotions. And so I've developed a lot of tools, um, especially the things I tell myself, the stories I tell myself. I can be so cruel to myself and so nasty to myself. I'll do something and I might say, "Oh, Jesus Christ, I'm so stupid," or something to that. And I'm fortunate enough to have a partner that says, "Apologize to yourself. You don't deserve that." And so I have a very long life of poor self-esteem, poor self-worth, all the things. But it's amazing. Without alcohol in your life, I just feel like I've finally put myself first. I still struggle with that, but I think I'm first of all, choosing sobriety is putting myself first over everything.
Yeah, I
So,
love that you mentioned that y as despite how far you've come, you're in your 50s now and you're still discovering who you are. And that's so honest because that is the truth for many, many of us. And this is not a rosy before and after story. Like, it's not a magic pill. You don't just become this enlightened human. And I mean, I got sober at 38 and I'm pushing, I'm mid 40s and I am still discovering and I think we always will be. So I've always appreciated how honest you've been about things because and the part where you said you just got so tired, you got so sick of yourself. Like sometimes I go to work with a client and I want for them to get and stay sober so bad. I think about them all the time. I worry about them. I pray for them. But I know deep down, if they're not ready and they're not sick of their own bullshit, there's nothing perfect that I can say. And so, what was that tipping point for you where you were just like, no, this is okay, enough?
that is a super question. Um, the one thing I go back to is the day my husband said, "It makes me sad when you can't remember what we talked about the night before." And I'm asking the same questions. And I never realized how much that was hurting him. And another sort of thing that coincided with that is as a dementia specialist, I'm like, "Oh my god, I'm damaging my brain."
Yeah.
Kate, I am teaching people how to lower their risk of getting dementia at the same time poisoning my own brain. And part of the tipping point was also how I learned the science about it. Because when you know, you can't unknow. And I knew that it was just like going to a gas station and sticking a gas guzzler in my mouth and putting the same shit in my body. And I did fast forward. Well, my date of sobriety was 11/17/23, and I had stopped drinking. However, December of 2023 started my acute and chronic pancreatitis. That was just about the most painful thing I have gone through in a long time, and my liver enzymes were not good. My, um, pancreas numbers were not good. Everything was off the charts, and I basically didn't have a choice to go back to drinking because what we did figure out is that the pancreatitis was certainly, you know, something that is an organ that gets affected by alcohol,
Yeah.
and I live with that now. I have to be very strict with the diet I have in terms of food. I have to get checked up all the time. I have to have blood levels taken all the time. And, when we talk about like rock bottoms and stuff, I never had one of those. I never had the consequences that a lot of people are facing, like, DUIs and hurting other people, destroying relationships. Um, I'm in a second marriage, so I have 2 stepchildren and a biological son, and the father of my biological son, um, was found deceased, and it was due to alcoholism and drugs, and this was something he battled his whole life. And part of, I think, a lot of what people do is they go back and they look at their past and they say, I should have done this. I should have done this. And a lot of regret, right? My regret was that I wish I had started this journey a lot younger because as a disease, I see that developing in my son and his choices that he's making in terms of drinking. In fact, we just recently went to a grad party and he was there and I notice everybody who drinks now, right? And I notice what they drink, how much they drink. Are they becoming intoxicated? And I had to leave. I think part of what you learn in this journey is that you got to take care of number one. And that means if you're in a situation where your sobriety is tested, you owe yourself the gift of leaving, and I did that. And, it's I can't change. I mean, when your kid turns 30 and they're in their 30s, it's not like I can tell them what to do anymore, right? So I am hoping through example that he sees that there is a beautiful life without alcohol. I think the social pressure and most people who think there's no way you can have fun. I listened to the last podcast you did with your husband about, you're not boring. You go out, you have a blast, and you guys choose what you want to attend. And you go to these sober events. And I'm like, that's how we have to choose to live. I'm done with bars and, going to see concerts at bars and sitting at bars and watching other people get drunk and spill on me. It's not my cup of tea anymore. I used to be that person.
Yeah, same, same. Well, thank you for sharing all that. One thing that stuck out to me when you were talking about consequences is, I said this in an episode where I talked about my course, which is the gut check, is that pain is enough of a consequence, internal pain. It doesn't have to be that you crashed your car or, lit a building on fire or did something horrific like me. But, not to turn this into like an infomercial for the gut check course. It just reminded me that I said those exact things, I think even in the course is, let's reframe the word consequence. Because what if it's about internal pain? And recognizing that your livelihood, your life, your mental health is enough to choose. But I want to walk back a minute about the pancreatitis statement because I got to give you some credit because you came to me before you knew that you had pancreatitis. So it wasn't like you got a doctor's diagnosis and then you were like, "Oh shit, I have to get sober." I mean, you did get sick of your bullshit prior to the health struggles because I remember you going to the doctor saying, "Oh my god, there's this new thing." And so I even remember you coming on to women's meetings and saying, "Here I am again." And then you said to me, "I can't say that one more time." Like, I can't face people one more time and say I'm at day 1. And I thought that was so brave of you to to go there because that's like a
Thank you.
hidden thing that so many of us struggle with, but we don't wanna say that out loud.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, so give yourself some credit that you reached out. Why well, you talked about therapy, and I think a lot of people get hung up on this. What was different about the coaching piece?
Well, even now, like I had a therapist for like 5 years, 6 years maybe. And it turned into this. I wasn't benefiting anymore. It was more like a friendship check-in is what it had evolved into, and I'm like, "This is not working." Um, so I ended up with another therapist, and this person does not specialize in addiction. Um, I have a lot of issues with which is very new, to finally get diagnosed with ADHD and deal with all that stuff. Um, so she helps me,
Yeah.
but with the coaching, like I said before, I really think I personally think it's been better for me than any therapy because you're relatable. And if someone struggles with alcohol and they want help, talking to someone who has no idea what you're talking about or the struggles that you have, I just didn't find helpful. I mean, I find my therapist now very helpful for my anxiety and my ADHD stuff, and she's doing some cognitive behavioral therapy. But in terms of the reasons for drinking and the reasons to stop and how to continue to have a healthful journey without relapse. Um, that's really, I think, the difference is that, well, first of all, you're a wonderful person and you're very likable and you're very accepting of everyone. But what I did like is that this is no bullshit. I'm going to call you out on your bullshit. And you know what? Oh, I remember. No, I have better wisdom, Kate, that I remember you told me.
Uh-oh.
except the shitty diaper.
Uh-oh.
You said something to the effect of, like, when are you going to decide not to be the victim anymore? Like, I all I did was I kept identifying as the victim. And what that did for me was it kept me drinking. Because if I said, well, I'm in this pain, so it's almost like I was giving myself a pass, right? I'm giving myself a pass because I'm in a lot of pain and my mother, my grandmother, my dance teacher, my mother, the triggering people in my life, it was all their fault and it wasn't my fault. And what you helped me realize was that my my parents did the best they could from what their lives were like as children and how they were parented. And I'll tell you, it's like I found a whole new empathy for my mom, who I would have never wanted to be raised by my grandmother. And my mom had a very I can only imagine how my mom's childhood was like. Um, but it's just very interesting, the generational stuff, because um I just learned, like, part of my journey was to figure out who of my relatives had this issue. And according to my mother, my grandfather's whole side had alcoholism and alcohol problems, and that's why he didn't drink. I never knew that. And, these things that happen in our lives, generation to generation to generation, why is it not talked about? Like, why does it have to be swept under the rug? It's embarrassing. I don't want to, um, you know, we don't share things, not like we do now. Like I share things so much with my kids that I never, would have thought of talking to my parents about. Um, so I think part of the healing is to stop playing the victim And I felt embarrassed about it. I felt like narcissistic in a way because I'm like, well, it's not my fault, you know? Um, and if only I wasn't treated like this, or if only I didn't have an abusive first husband relationship. And so I could go on in my pity pot. And I was there. I was there a long, long time. Um, and you helped me to see that you're going to be in this roller coaster and hamster wheel until you recognize that you're not a victim. You know, you've got to figure out your stuff. And out the other thing I've learned is that alcohol makes nothing better. Nothing. It only makes it worse. So you may have a very difficult, say, you know, I have a loss and I'm grieving. Well, it's normal. It's a normal human thing to grieve and to go through that process. What's not normal is feeding it with alcohol and thinking it's going to go away. That's the disease speak. This, the healing speak is I'm going to journal about it. I'm going to cry. I'm going to have bad days. I'm going to have good days. And to look at all the pieces of that grief process. Um, and I've done a lot of reading. That's the other thing I've done. A lot of reading to get a lot of podcasts, a lot of different types of educational pieces, because I think it's not just about the not drinking, because that's kind of the easy thing, you know? No, I don't need another drink, or no, I'm not drinking, but I still am a fucking mess.
Absolutely. Yeah. That putting down the alcohols is, unfortunately, the easy part. The rest that comes is why we do coaching, because then there's this onslaught of feelings and emotions and old shit to deal with. And now that you bring up the victim story that seemed to be an issue for you at that time, now I remember, like, I'm actually kind of reminiscing on some of our sessions together. And that was something that, even though I kind of pushed you into thinking about, you really did come upon that yourself. And that's what the goal of coaching is, right? It's not for me to say, "Tammy, this is your problem." Like, you came across those answers yourself. You thought about it, prayed about it, journaled about it, whatever, on your own, and then came to me and said, "Okay, I've realized I'm doing this. I'm saying this." After conversations, and I thought, "Gosh, this is working." Like, you're coming to these conclusions on your own. This is not spoon-fed. This is not me telling you what to do with your life. That's not what coaching is. It's letting you come to those realizations, because that's when it's powerful. That's when the shit sticks. When you've realized, "Oh, this is where I'm stuck." And, I remember bonding. We bonded over, grandparents that said things to us. My grandmother used to say, "You can never be too rich or too thin."
Yes.
And I remember that. I'm wearing her perfume today because, I don't know, I'm into vintage. But, yeah, the messages we receive growing up, and the importance of reframing all that so that we don't live in a victim mentality. Um,
And I just think most people, and I think our human nature is simply just the self-defense, and I'm sure people are listening and saying, well, she has no idea what I'm going through. And, maybe they're saying I am a victim. And everybody's at a different place. Um, and I totally respect that because I was at the deepest places sometimes. And suffering with depression and anxiety, there were days that I just, don't want to get out of bed. But those are the days that I'll get on a meeting. Those are the days that I'll text my friends. Um, or I just let myself sleep it out. Someone told me when in doubt, sleep it out.
I love that.
And it works for me. It works for me. If I just go to bed, I wake up, like different, you know? I gave myself that. And it's hard it's really hard to think you're worth all the work it takes to get alcohol free, you know? It's difficult if you've been sort of beaten over the head enough where you've been programmed to think, I'm not worthy. And it is those early imprinted words that our parental figures tell us or teachers or mentors, people who we looked up to, right? So if we're not being accepted the way we are, and I remember talking to you about what I really wanted, what I was really missing was this sense of being unconditionally loved and to grow up feeling I'm loved if I'm this. I'm loved if I'm this. I'm thin. I'm going in this career path. I did great in this. And if it didn't work out that way, then I felt like I was disappointing my parents. Um, and I'm a people pleaser. That's the other thing. You learn along the healing journey, I've learned how to set boundaries and to actually learn how to say no.
Yeah, I love that. So much good stuff. Um, you brought up the weight issues a couple times, and I thought it would be important to circle back to the correlation between the gastric bypass and the drinking, and if because I did some bits of an episode on that, but that is a topic that we could do an entire separate episode on because there's so much overlap in terms of the mindset. And what I said on the previous episode was it's very, very common. And I think I said this to you. There's a very high level of people who have a gastric bypass. And when they cannot physically fill their, void with food, then turn to alcohol and then, of course, get intoxicated so much faster. And so I'm wondering if you'd talk a little bit about that part of your story.
Yeah, I mean, I felt like $1,000,000, right? I had lost a ton of weight. Um, I was getting positive reinforcement and I still was the same person. So I was still in pain. I was still struggling for self-esteem, even though I had lost so much weight. And again, if you don't learn the trauma, the past trauma and work through it so that you can get to the other side, it doesn't matter what you think, right? I thought gastric bypass, that's the answer. Yet because I couldn't put food in and this was not a conscientious decision. Like this wasn't, well, I'm just going to drink now. This was if I can't numb with food, I can't numb with cigarettes. Oh, this stuff makes me feel good. Oh, and not that I mean, college, high school, I've been drink all the time, but it never took over my life like it did in my, 40s, 50s. Um, but it was helping me not to eat when I knew I couldn't eat. and I was just checking out. I could just check out, and it was filling well, I thought it was filling a void, right? I thought that that's what it was doing for me. Um, I got sick a lot because you also I mean, you get drunker quicker, you get sicker quicker, all the things, right? Your metabolism just processes it really quickly. Um,
How much weight did you lose, if you don't mind me asking?
yeah, I lost well, I went from 304 pounds to 150 pounds.
Wow. Half your size.
Yeah,
Wow.
half my size. And, after I mean, God, that was 2005. And a lot happens, but I'm still in a range of acceptability, like at 157. But it's really it is nice to be relieved of that, but I will be completely honest, it is not half as nice as being completely free from alcohol and the cage that it puts you in. Somebody was it when I heard the whole freedom, you know, I'm like, "What are you freaking talking about? What's freedom?" Yeah, I'm free because I live in the United States. I mean, what is freedom? You know what freedom is when you have an addiction and you no longer are utilizing that substance. Because I truly believe that if I drank tomorrow or today, in no time at all, I'd be back up to 2 bottles a night, like, less than a few days. So I know that I cannot have a drink, but knowing the freedom I have without it is pretty reinforcing.
Yeah. That is I couldn't say that any better, any more eloquently than you just did. The word freedom, you only understand it when you get on the other side of alcohol, when you are able to stop obsessing, to have it stop controlling your life, stop running the show, and suddenly you are free and on so many levels. And I love that you use that analogy of being in a cage because I've used that several times. And gosh, so many wise words, Tammy. I'm just kidding. Who was your No, no, you have this has been so incredibly amazing listening to you articulate your uncoverings in sobriety. I mean, I'm just like, I'm blown away. Like, I have the chills.
Aw.
I'm blown away of how knowledgeable you are, how much insight you have, how much passion you have around it. Um, and I just feel so lucky that I even got to be on the journey with you in the beginning to hear, So thank you
Well,
so
I
much
feel
for coming.
fortunate too. I really do. It's amazing how this journey connects people.
Yeah, yeah,
Kate, I would have never known you,
yeah,
right? I mean, a lot of friends now that I call my dearest friends, I would have never met them if I had been, on that horrible path.
yeah. Same. The way that your life shape shifts and it's like you go left instead of right here and there, and the people you meet, I mean, it's just it's like you couldn't write it any better. I feel the same. The clients that I've met, the people I've come across. In what universe, besides, you're in healthcare, but you're all the way in Massachusetts and, just, um has anyone ever told you you look like Patricia Fields? I mean,
That.
a young Patricia Fields. Who's that? Ugh,
Oh my God, I gotta Google it.
I never No, she's like one of my style icons. She's the fashion designer, the costume designer behind much of the most famous shows that are famous for fashion.
Really?
The Devil Wears Prada, Emily in Paris, um, gosh, Sex in the City, and Pat Fields is is a costume designer that I just saw her in New York last week, and that's why I was thinking about that. But
Oh, that's hysterical.
anyway, we're getting
I
derailed, but I just adore you.
Oh, thank you
And
so
and and
much.
it's a young Patricia Fields because she is in her 80s now.
Well, you know what's funny, Kate? I looked and I'm like, "Oh, okay."
I'm telling you, in person, she actually looks pretty fucking good. I just saw her, like,
Oh,
3 or 4 days ago, and she still colors her hair, and it's that same color that you wear your hair as, and or if that's your natural color, I don't know, but that's she's gorgeous. I mean, for
unfortunately, my natural color is gray, so now,
same,
I have to color.
same. Yes. Okay, Tammy, I don't wanna keep
I
you
know.
talking, but thank you so, so much. I just wow.
Thanks for having me on. This has been a blast, and I really appreciate it, and, thank you for all you've done for me.
Ah, what an awesome conversation. Thanks so much. Thanks for tuning in to Rewired Sober. You can find me on my Instagram at Rewired Sober, where there are links to catch up with me and all the things I'm working on in my coaching business, or the link tree to my business directly will be in the show notes. I so appreciate you joining me on this journey, and I welcome any feedback or any topics you want to hear about, things that you're struggling with or interested in. I love you all so very much, and I'm just so enjoying doing this with you.